The Israeli Supreme Court says ultra-orthodox must serve in the military.
The ultra-orthodox have condemned it and said it's a huge mistake. The secular Israelis, the ones who are, bearing the burden of this army service, have welcomed it.
Plus, protesters raid parliament in Nairobi.
Storm parliament. We were able to go into an area where some parts of the building, is on fire.
And later, an update from Kyiv, warrants issued for 2 high-ranking Russian military officers, and Julian Assange makes a deal to avoid more jail time. Today is Tuesday, June 25th, and this is VOA's Flashpoint Global Crises. Good evening, I'm Steve Karish in Washington. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant met with U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin in Washington on Tuesday. This a day after receiving a warning from Secretary of State Antony Blinken against allowing the conflict with Hamas in Gaza to expand. The State Department said Blinken updated Gallant on ongoing diplomatic efforts to advance security, governance, and reconstruction in Gaza during a post-conflict period, and he emphasized 2 things to the Israeli minister.
Number 1, our ongoing commitment to Israel's security. Number 2, the importance of Israel developing robust, realistic plans for the day after the conflict, plans that include path towards governance, towards security, towards reconstruction. We've obviously been working on these same ideas with partners in the region and engaging in conversations with Israel, but we think it's important that Israel put forward its own ideas.
That's Matthew Miller, spokesperson for the U.S. State Department. Secretary Blinken also pressed Gallant to take more steps to protect aid workers in Gaza. President Joe Biden has outlined a ceasefire that would halt fighting for 6 weeks and facilitate the release of Hamas-held hostages. Hamas has said any agreement must result in an end to the war. That's a demand that Israel has rejected. More big news from Israel. On Tuesday, the Israeli Supreme Court ruled that the ultra-Orthodox are not exempt from military service and that the military must begin drafting them. For more on this, I'm joined by VOA's Linda Gradstein in Jerusalem.
This goes back to 1948. When the State of Israel was created right after the Holocaust. And, thousands and thousands of Jewish scholars were killed in the Holocaust. And so the rabbis went to the first prime minister of Israel, Ben-Gurion, and said, we would like an army exemption for a few dozen outstanding Torah scholars because we think they can contribute more to the Jewish people by studying full-time and studying Torah and learning than by being in the army. And Ben-Gurion agreed. And since then, that exemption has been in place. And today there are 63,000, anywhere from 1/3 to 1/2 of whom are not actually studying full-time. So the court basically said today, in a very important ruling, that this is discriminatory and that there's no basis to exempt an entire group of people like this.
And I would imagine that there's been some tension in society over this.
There has been a tremendous amount of tension in society over this. And since the war, in the beginning of the war, they called up more than 300,000 soldiers, reservists, well into their 30s, 40s, in some cases even in their early 50s. And they left their jobs, their families behind. So it's a big societal issue. In terms of the ultra-Orthodox politically, it's true that in the last 20 years or so, they have been more associated with right-wing governments, but they have also been part of left-wing governments in the past. So I don't know that I would necessarily say that they're more extremist, but I think that what this war has done is that I think people just feel it's not fair and that the societal burden is just too much. And the court ruling today said that either the ultra-Orthodox have to begin to be drafted, although it didn't say how many and how quickly that would happen, or they would lose their funding for their religious institutes. Now, I personally find it a little bit hard to imagine that large numbers of ultra-Orthodox are really going to be drafted. The average has been so far about 700 a year. And it's also a challenge for the army because they need to get special kosher food. And there's tension sometimes between men who are drafted. The ultra-Orthodox don't want to have anything to do with women on the base. So it presents its own challenges. But it'll be very interesting to see what happens. It's also a challenge to Netanyahu's coalition government as well.
And what about public reaction?
So I guess, part of it is where you're coming from. The ultra-Orthodox have condemned it and said it's a huge mistake. The secular Israelis, the ones who are, bearing the burden of this army service, have welcomed it. And on the same day, by the way, was the first reading of a bill to actually increase the age until which reservists will be called to do reserve duty. So there really is a need for more soldiers. I think some Israeli analysts say that it's also a way of kind of integrating society, that right now the ultra-Orthodox are kind of seen as outside mainstream society. But again, I am very hesitant that it's going to lead to large numbers of ultra-Orthodox men being drafted. And we're only talking about the men, by the way, not the women.
VOA's Linda Gradstein in Jerusalem. Linda, as always, thanks for your reporting today.
Thank you, Steve.
Russian officials accused the U.S. of direct participation in the Russia-Ukraine war. This after Ukrainian strikes on Crimea using Western weapons. Meanwhile, Ukraine and Moldova are officially beginning the EU accession process. VOA correspondent Anna Chernikova has the details from Kyiv.
A number of explosions were heard in Sevastopol in occupied Crimea over the weekend. The Russian Ministry of Defense said Ukrainian forces conducted an attack allegedly using the US-supplied ATACMS missiles. Russian authorities confirmed 4 people were killed and more than 150 injured. The Russian military authorities also admitted that the casualties among the civilian population occurred as a result of debris falling caused by the Russian air defense systems. The Russian Foreign Ministry accused the US of direct participation in Russia-Ukraine conflict. The United States said that it is up to Ukraine to decide which targets to hit with Western weapons and how to conduct its military operations. Experts believe that the Belbek airfield was the actual target of the Ukrainian missile attack, which is located 4.5 kilometers northeast from the area where explosions were reported. The airfield is located on the outskirts of the village of Lyubimivka, whereas the Russian authorities of Sevastopol claimed the debris injured 2 people. The Ukrainian military did not comment on the strike. The advisor to the head of the office of the President of Ukraine, Mikhailo Podolyak, reported on his official Telegram channel that Crimea is a big military camp with many targets, which the Russian authorities are trying to cover with the civilian population shield. Meanwhile, President Zelensky replaced the commander of the United Forces of the Ukrainian Armed Forces, Yuri Sodal, with Brigadier General Andriy Gnatov.
Питання в Збройних силах України. Я ухвалив рішення замінити командувача Об'єднаних сил Збройних сил України.
He announced this in his evening address. Zelensky did not say the reasons for the dismissal. However, on June 24th, the Chief of Staff of the Azov Brigade of the National Guard of Ukraine, Bogdan Krotevich, announced he submitted a statement to the State Bureau of Investigation, calling for an investigation into the actions of Lieutenant General Yuri Sodal due to heavy losses among personnel. Andriy Gnatov has a good reputation among Ukrainian soldiers. He is a former Chief of Staff and Deputy Commander of the Operational Command of the South Front Line. He was also the head of defense of Bakhmut. Gnatov was serving in Crimea before its occupation by Russia. Moving on to the EU integration news. Negotiations on Ukraine's accession to the European Union officially began on Tuesday. Last week, the EU Council approved the negotiating framework for Ukraine and Moldova, which paved the way to the start of negotiations on June 25th in Luxembourg. The European Commission confirmed on June 7 that it had given a positive verbal assessment of the progress of the European integration reforms of Ukraine and Moldova, outlined in the November report on EU enlargement. The very beginning of negotiations does not mean a quick accession to the EU. The head of the European Council, Charles Michel, previously suggested that Ukraine could become a member of the EU by 2030 if both sides do their homework. President Zelensky congratulated Ukrainians on achieving this milestone and noted that from now on, Ukrainians will not be led astray from the path to a united Europe. Previously, Zelensky said that Ukraine will work hard to ensure that Ukraine's accession to the EU takes years, not decades. Anna Chernikova, VOA News, Kyiv.
You're listening to Flashpoint Global Crises from the Voice of America. I'm Steve Karish in Washington. A look at protests turned violent in Nairobi coming up. First, though, a little more on the situation in Ukraine. The International Criminal Court issues arrest warrants for 2 top Russian military figures for attacks on civilian targets in Ukraine. VOA's Lori London reports.
For war crimes and crimes against humanity, the Hague-based court said Monday it had issued arrest warrants for Russia's former defense minister, Sergei Shoigu, and its military chief of staff, General Valery Gerasimov. The court said its judges found, quote, reasonable grounds to believe that the 2 suspects bear responsibility for missile strikes carried out by Russian armed forces against the Ukrainian electric infrastructure. Shoigu has been a longstanding friend and ally of Putin and played a key role in the war. This is the 3rd time the global court has accused senior Russian leaders of war crimes. Last year, the court issued a warrant for Russian President Vladimir Putin, accusing him of personal responsibility for the abductions of children from Ukraine. Sustained Russian attacks on Ukraine's power grid in recent weeks have forced the government to institute nationwide rolling blackouts. The court's move was welcomed by Kyiv, but dismissed as legally meaningless by Moscow. Russia, which, like Ukraine, is not a member of the ICC, has repeatedly said Ukraine's energy infrastructure is a legitimate military target and denies targeting civilians or civilian infrastructure. Since the ICC has no police force of its own and relies on member states to make arrests, it's unclear if any of the Russian suspects will ever stand trial. Lori London, VOA News, Washington.
Police opened fire on demonstrators trying to storm Kenya's legislature on Tuesday, with at least 5 protesters killed, dozens wounded, and sections of the parliament building set ablaze as lawmakers inside passed legislation to raise taxes. In chaotic scenes, protesters overwhelmed police and chased them away in an attempt to storm the parliament compound. Flames could be seen coming from inside. Lucy Watheria was there.
Everything that has happened across the country today, I support it. I'm happy about everything that has happened, because if the higher people are not going to listen, we have to act for them to understand we are serious about the change that we want. Reject the finance bill, period.
Zelvian Baraka is a carpenter, and he was at the parliament on Tuesday also.
I think what I can say about what's going on, about the riots and everything that's happening is, I don't think they should be shooting people and killing people, because people are trying to air their views, and they're trying to talk about what's happening and what's affecting their lives. So I don't think the police are supposed to shoot them. And I also think people who are striking on the parliament, they should not riot and throw stones and do other things that are not supposed to be done.
VOA's Nairobi bureau chief Miriam Diallo is also at the parliament, and she joins me now.
This is a protest that started last week, and they started protesting because of proposed tax hikes in the 2024 finance bill. So they decided that, there were a lot of items that were going to get a tax hike, including a 16% tax increase on bread and other items that were going to get a tax hike. So they decided that, and it's mostly Gen Zs, the young people who decided to go out and protest. So last week that happened, and then this week it resumed. Today, they decided that the whole week, actually, they've organized themselves to have maybe some of their members talk to, some of the protesters talk to their member of parliament to try to convince them to either get rid of the whole bill, which is another issue now, because I have to say the government had decided to strike some of those tax hikes just to say, okay, well, we're going to compromise. But at the end of the day, the protesters decided that they actually don't even want the finance bill. They just want it gone, basically.
But today is different. The protests are larger, more violent. They raided Parliament. What happened today?
So today, all day, actually, we were here where, they were very peaceful. Some of them, at least where I was, I witnessed, a lot of them coming out saying, we are peaceful, chanting right in front of the police, riot police. And then, some of the riot police for the longest time also were calm until things started getting out of control. And then they will either fire water cannons and also fire some tear gas. So I was just at Parliament. I looked at it. Some of the gates were obviously taken down, and protesters, reportedly from the people that we asked there, stormed Parliament. We were able to go into an area where some parts of the building, is on fire, but we don't have any confirmation as to who set that part on fire. It's just a small part, and then obviously as we were standing there and asking questions, the police asked us to leave. In front of Parliament, we've asked many people who have said that they've seen people who were shot, dead, and so those numbers vary, from the eyewitnesses that we've talked about. Some have said, I've seen one, some have said, I've seen 5, other people have said, I've seen 3, so I don't have a confirmation of the number of people who died, but that was outside of Parliament.
And what's the situation like there now?
Right now, basically, the entire CBD, which is the Central Business District, in a lot of blocks, basically, there is still a standoff. The protesters, they go back and forth with police, and then police fires tear gas. And, I haven't seen a lot of water cannons, but, the police is still trying to disperse them. So it's pockets of it. But they're still present in the downtown. It's about, let me look at my watch, it's almost 5 p.m., 5 minutes of 5, and, most businesses are closed, and the standoff between protesters and the police.
And we'll leave it there for today. VOA's Nairobi Bureau Chief, Miriama Diallo, on the scene outside of the Parliament in Nairobi. Miriama, thanks for your reporting. Stay safe.
Thank you very much.
Also from Nairobi, we heard on Monday's show about the Kenyan troops who were headed to Haiti to restore law and order. The first group of them arrived in Port-au-Prince on Tuesday. It's not immediately known what the Kenyans' first assignment would be, but they're going to face violent gangs that control 80% of Haiti's capital. The gangs have left more than 580,000 people across the country homeless, and they're pillaging neighborhoods in their quest to control more territory. Check out voanews.com for the latest as this story evolves. The trial in Russia of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich is set to begin this week behind closed doors. Reuters' Trevor Carroll gets us up to speed.
Russia is accusing him of collecting secrets for the U.S. CIA, charges he and the paper he works for deny. Here's what you need to know. Gershkovich had reported on Russia for more than 5 years before his arrest. He's a fluent Russian speaker, an American born to Soviet emigres and raised in New Jersey. Gershkovich moved to the Russian capital in late 2017 to join the English-language Moscow Times. He also worked for the French news agency Agence France-Presse and joined the Wall Street Journal just before Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022. On March 29, 2023, on a trip to the industrial city of Yekaterinburg in the Ural Mountains, Gershkovich was detained by the Federal Security Service, or FSB, in a steakhouse. The FSB says he was trying to gather secrets on a Russian defense enterprise, which is one of the world's biggest battle tank producers, about 880 miles east of Moscow. The White House condemned his arrest almost immediately in March of 2023.
These espionage charges are ridiculous. We condemn the detention of Mr. Gershkovich in the strongest terms.
U.S. President Joe Biden has called his detention, quote, totally illegal. Gershkovich is the first American journalist to be detained on spy charges in Russia since the Cold War and could face up to 20 years in prison if convicted. The FSB said it caught him, quote, red-handed, trying to obtain military secrets. Russian prosecutors say Gershkovich carried out the illegal actions using, quote, painstaking conspiratorial methods. They did not release any documentary evidence to back up the charge. The Wall Street Journal says Gershkovich was on a reporting assignment and has said the accusations are based on lies. It denies he is a spy and demands his release. The trial will take place behind closed doors. U.S. State Department spokesperson Matthew Miller says that's a concern.
We are going to attempt to attend the trial. Don't know if that will be possible. We have continued to have consular access to Evan at times. We will try to attend the trial as we try to attend the trial of any American citizens who are detained in Russia.
U.S. diplomats say that Gershkovich was not a spy and that he was detained by the FSB to build up a store of arrested U.S. citizens who could later be swapped for Russians detained in the West. Russian President Vladimir Putin has suggested in the past that a swap for Gershkovich could be possible, but said such negotiations should be held away from the media.
That's Reuters' Trevor Carroll with that report. And in other journalism news, WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is set to plead guilty to violating U.S. espionage laws in a deal that will end his imprisonment in Britain and allow him to return home to Australia and end a long legal odyssey. Ryan Chang has more.
After 5 years fighting U.S. extradition from a top-security UK jail, Julian Assange appeared to be boarding a plane that WikiLeaks says is flying out of the United Kingdom in footage it released Tuesday. He's expected to appear in court on the island of Saipan Wednesday evening and plead guilty to violating U.S. espionage law in exchange for his freedom. WikiLeaks shared a video of Assange's wife, Stella, outside London's top-security Belmarsh prison. Julian was kept there since 2019, and she had made many visits over the years to see him.
This period of our lives, I'm confident now, has come to an end. And I think that by this time next week, Julian will be free.
Filings in the U.S. District Court for the Northern Mariana Islands say Julian Assange agreed to plead guilty to a single count of conspiring to obtain and disclose classified U.S. national defense documents. In 2010, WikiLeaks released hundreds of thousands of classified military documents on Washington's wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, and troves of diplomatic cables. The court on Saipan is expected to sentence Assange to 62 months of time already served, crediting Assange's time in prison in London. This would let him avoid being imprisoned in the United States and be left free to return to Australia after the proceedings. Assange was indicted during former President Donald Trump's administration over WikiLeaks' mass release of documents. Julian Assange's supporters have long criticized the use of charges typically levied against federal government employees in Assange's case, and press freedom advocates argue criminally charging Assange is a threat to free speech.
That's Ryan Chang of Reuters reporting for us. And that's going to wrap up today's program. There's more VOA coverage 24 hours a day on our website, voanews.com, and across our social media platforms. On behalf of everyone here at VOA, thanks for listening. Until tomorrow, I'm Steve Karish.
For deeper dives and expert analysis, listen to VOA podcasts. Issues in the News explores the biggest stories every weekend, while International Edition keeps you informed every weekday. Plus, with the 5-minute newscast at the top of every hour, you're always up to date.